There is a quiet truth that has traveled through time, whispered in forests, spoken in parables, and carried in silence. It was never owned by temples, never locked inside scriptures, and never meant to be hidden. Yet somehow it was. This truth is simple, so simple that the restless mind overlooks it. So close that people search for it everywhere, except within themselves. The secret is this: what you seek outside is already alive within you, not in rituals, not in institutions, not in the approval of others, but in awareness. Look closely at your own experience. Every moment of peace you have ever felt did not come from the world it arose when your mind became still. Every moment of clarity came not from being given truth, but from seeing it directly. Yet people are taught to depend, to follow, to obey, to seek permission to feel whole. Why? Because a person who discovers this truth becomes free, and a free mind cannot be controlled. You are told that enlightenment is distant, that truth is complicated, that you must earn your worth. But observe carefully: when you let go of fear, what remains? When you stop chasing, what do you notice? When the noise fades, what is still there? There in that quiet space is the answer. It has no name, yet it is always present. It does not belong to any religion, yet all true teachings point toward it. The wise never tried to give you something new. They only tried to remove what was false. Layers of belief, fear of judgment, endless desire. Peel these away and what remains is not emptiness, but clarity, peace, and a deep sense of knowing. This is the secret. Not something to believe, but something to see. Not something to chase, but something to realize. So stop searching so far away, be still. Turn inward. The truth is within you. True peace, clarity, and fulfillment are not found in external rituals, institutions, or teachings, but arise from looking inward. For centuries, people have sought truth and meaning outside themselves, wandering through temples, scriptures, rituals, and teachings, hoping to find something that completes them. They search for answers in distant lands, in sacred objects, in elaborate ceremonies, or in the approval of others. Yet, the very essence they are seeking is not in any of these outward forms. The truth, the peace, clarity, and fulfillment that seem so elusive is already present within each person. It is not something that can be handed over or bought. It cannot be taught in full by any master or stored in a holy place. Instead, it exists quietly, waiting to be recognized, accessible the moment one turns the gaze inward. The human mind has a tendency to look outward for security, validation, and guidance. We are taught to believe that the world outside us holds the keys to happiness and meaning. However, this constant seeking often creates only more restlessness, anxiety, and dissatisfaction. It is like looking for water in the ocean while ignoring the clear, flowing spring inside. The teachings of the wise are not meant to add to the complexity of life, but to point toward this inner well of truth. The moment we stop depending solely on external forms, we begin to sense the subtle presence that has always existed within. This inner truth is not something abstract or mystical. It is simple, direct, and immediate. It manifests in awareness, the ability to observe one's own mind, emotions, and reactions without judgment. It is present when the mind is quiet, when fear and desire are set aside, and when the incessant chatter of shoulds and musts fades. In that stillness, one realizes that the completeness we seek is not somewhere else. It has always been our own nature. Peace is not something to chase. It is what remains when the illusions of separateness and lack dissolve. Recognizing this truth transforms life profoundly. When a person understands that fulfillment comes from within, dependence on external validation diminishes. Happiness is no longer fragile or conditional on circumstances. The storms of life may still come, but their impact is softened by the realization that the source of true strength and clarity is already present inside. This truth empowers individuals to live authentically, act compassionately, and experience freedom in a way that no external authority, ritual, or institution can provide. Ultimately, the greatest journey is not the one that leads outward across lands or scriptures, but the one that leads inward. Turning the mind inward and connecting with the inner truth is not a complex practice. It is a simple shift of attention. Yet it is so profound that once experienced, life is never seen in the same way again. The peace, clarity, and fulfillment that people have sought all their lives quietly dwell within, waiting only for the awareness to meet them. Silence and awareness reveal reality. Stillness of the mind allows one to perceive truth directly, without needing guidance or approval from others. In the rush of daily life, the mind is constantly occupied, filled with thoughts, judgments, worries, and desires. It moves ceaselessly from one concern to another, rarely pausing to notice what is actually happening in the present moment. Yet it is precisely in the stillness between thoughts, in the quiet space that we often overlook, that reality becomes visible. True awareness is not something forced or sought through endless activity. It emerges naturally when the noise of the mind is allowed to settle. When a person cultivates this awareness, they begin to perceive life directly, without the distortions of preconceived ideas or emotional turbulence. It is in this silence that one recognizes the truth of existence, as it is, beyond labels, opinions, or desires. Awareness does not require complex practices or rigid routines. It is simply the act of paying attention not to external distractions, but to one's own inner experience. When the mind stops clinging to the past or projecting into the future, there is space to see clearly what is right in front of us. Every sensation, thought, or feeling arises and passes, and yet in their passing, they reveal the nature of impermanence. In this observation, one begins to notice a deeper reality, a constant presence that witnesses without judgment, a quiet knowing that exists independently of the turmoil of thought. This presence is not something distant or separate, it is the very essence of awareness itself, the lens through which life is perceived clearly. Silence is not merely the absence of sound, it is a state of inner calm, where the habitual patterns of the mind loosen their grip. In silence, we begin to recognize the subtle movements of thought and emotion as they arise and fade. Rather than being swept away by them, we observe them with clarity. In this observation, illusions lose their power. Fears and attachments which once seemed urgent and real are seen for what they truly are, temporary passing experiences. Through awareness, the mind no longer confuses these fleeting experiences with ultimate reality. One begins to understand that the source of peace and insight is always available, not dependent on circumstances but inherent in the act of simply being present. This direct experience of reality is profound. It bypasses the need for belief, argument, or external authority. Institutions, doctrines, and rituals can guide and inspire, but they cannot grant the clarity that arises naturally in stillness. When a person learns to cultivate awareness, they discover that life itself is a mirror of truth. Each moment, each encounter, each sensation offers a window into the underlying reality of impermanence, connection, and presence. Silence becomes a teacher, and awareness becomes the path to understanding. Ultimately, the greatest wisdom comes not from external accumulation but from turning attention inward. In quiet observation, the mind meets reality as it is. The answers that seem so distant and complicated are revealed in the simplicity of awareness. And in this recognition, life unfolds with clarity, ease, and freedom. Freedom comes from self-realization. Understanding this inner truth frees the mind from fear, desire, and dependence, making it beyond control. True freedom is rarely found in the world around us. People often equate freedom with wealth, status, possessions, or the absence of external constraints. Yet even those who seem to have everything can feel trapped by fear, desire, judgment, and the endless pull of the mind. The freedom that matters most is not external, it arises from within, from a deep recognition of one's own nature and the reality of life. Self-realization is the key that unlocks this freedom, for it allows the mind to see clearly what is real and what is merely a product of conditioning. When a person understands themselves fully, without illusion or pretense, they are no longer bound by the chains of expectation, attachment, or fear. The journey towards self-realization is subtle and gradual. It begins with observation, watching the patterns of thought, emotion, and behavior without judgment or identification. As one observes, it becomes clear how much of life has been influenced by external pressures, cultural norms, and habitual reactions. Many live as though their identity is defined by these influences, chasing approval, recognition, or security, never realizing that their true essence lies beyond these transient forms. The moment a person begins to see this distinction between who they are inherently and what the world tells them to be, a profound shift occurs. The mind becomes lighter, less burdened by the compulsions of habit and fear. Self-realization does not mean escaping the world or renouncing life. On the contrary, it allows a person to engage with life fully but without being dominated by it. Freedom comes not from avoiding difficulties but from understanding them clearly and responding from a place of clarity rather than reaction. When the mind is free from attachment, fear, and false identity, every action becomes intentional, every choice conscious, and every moment vibrant. The person who has realized themselves no longer lives as a prisoner of circumstance but moves through life with a quiet authority, guided by insight rather than impulse. This freedom is deeply transformative. It is not dependent on possessions, relationships, or recognition. It cannot be given, taken, or controlled by others because it exists in the direct knowledge of oneself. In this state, suffering is no longer experienced as an overwhelming force but as a teacher, a signpost pointing toward deeper understanding. Joy is no longer fleeting or conditional because it is rooted in the awareness of being, not in external circumstances. The mind becomes a clear sky, and thoughts, emotions, and events pass through it like clouds, leaving the essence of freedom untouched. Ultimately, the freedom that arises from self-realization is the most profound of all gifts. It is the liberation from illusion, the release from fear, and the discovery of inner strength that nothing outside can diminish. When a person touches this freedom, they no longer need to seek it elsewhere, because they recognize it as their own nature, ever present, unshakable, and complete. In this recognition, life unfolds naturally, without striving, without conflict, and without the illusions that once bound the mind. True freedom, then, is not something distant or earned. It is realized when one awakens to the reality of the self and the truth that lies beyond all appearances. Teachings remove false layers, not add beliefs. Spiritual guidance points toward removing illusions like fear, judgment, and attachment, rather than giving something external to follow. Many seekers make the mistake of thinking that wisdom or spiritual teaching is about acquiring something new beliefs, new rituals, or new knowledge. They assume that enlightenment or truth is an addition, something to be collected, like possessions or achievements. Yet the teachings of the truly wise reveal a different path. Their guidance is not about piling more layers onto the mind, but about gently removing the layers that cover the inherent clarity already present within. Each teaching, each parable, and each instruction is a mirror that shows what is false, what is constructed, and what distracts from the reality that has always been within. These layers take many forms. Fear convinces the mind that it is fragile, that safety must be sought outside. Desire convinces the heart that fulfillment lies in acquiring, controlling, or achieving. Judgment convinces the ego that its worth depends on comparison, competition, and approval. Society, culture, and even religious institutions often reinforce these layers, teaching people to conform, to follow rules without question, and to defer to authority. Over time, the mind becomes a dense web of attachments and illusions, and the truth of one's own nature becomes hidden beneath these accumulated beliefs and fears. The role of the wise is not to impose new structures, but to guide the seeker in peeling away these layers. It is a process of removal, of uncovering, not accumulation. Each meditation, each moment of self-observation, each reflection on life's impermanence is a step towards seeing clearly what has always been present. As the layers fall away, clarity and freedom emerge naturally because they are not something that must be constructed, they are simply revealed. The mind recognizes its own inherent stillness, the heart recognizes its own natural peace. The teachings act as tools, not as final destinations. They are like a hand helping a traveler climb out of a pit. Once the traveler is out, the hand steps away, and the traveler is left with the open sky. This approach requires patience and courage. Removing layers can be uncomfortable because it challenges long-held beliefs and habitual patterns. It may feel as though the familiar self is being dismantled. Yet the wisdom in this process is that what is removed is not truly the self, it is only the false coverings that obscure it. Each fear let go, each attachment released, each judgment softened, brings the mind closer to its natural clarity. The process is not about rejecting life or turning away from experience, but about seeing it without distortion. One learns to experience joy, sorrow, and every moment of life without clinging, without resisting, and without confusion. Ultimately, the most profound teachings are those that do not burden the seeker with dogma or doctrine. They do not demand blind faith or obedience. Instead, they gently dissolve illusion, revealing what was always there: a mind that is clear, a heart that is open, and a presence that is free. This is why true wisdom is so subtle and so easily overlooked. It is not flashy or dramatic, but quiet, direct, and transformative. The layers fall away and the truth shines naturally, without effort, without adding, simply by revealing what has always been real. Stop searching outward. Look inward. The ultimate secret is always present within. It's realized through observation, stillness, and self-awareness, not external pursuit. For much of life, people are trained to look outward for answers. They search for happiness in possessions, recognition in the eyes of others, and meaning in distant places or complex teachings. Every new achievement, relationship, or object is assumed to hold the key to fulfillment. Yet no matter how much is gained, there remains a subtle emptiness, a quiet dissatisfaction that whispers, "This is not enough." The truth, however, has always been closer than anyone realizes. It is not hidden in the world outside, it is not waiting in faraway lands or distant authorities. The answer has always been within, patiently waiting for attention. Looking inward is not an act of denial or retreat, it is an act of courage. It requires turning the gaze away from the distractions, temptations, and expectations of the outside world and directing it toward the inner landscape of the mind and heart. It is an honest and fearless examination of one's own thoughts, desires, fears, and patterns. In this practice, the mind begins to notice how much of life has been spent reacting to what is external rather than responding from a place of clarity. This realization is not a condemnation but a gentle awakening, a recognition that the source of peace, wisdom, and freedom does not come from accumulation but from understanding. When the search shifts inward, life begins to transform. External events no longer control the mind's peace. Relationships, wealth, or social status become secondary to the experience of presence and awareness. Even suffering is no longer threatening because it is seen as a teacher rather than an enemy. The inner world becomes a mirror in which one can perceive reality directly. Thoughts, emotions, and sensations are observed without attachment, revealing their transient and impermanent nature. In this observation, the self that was once believed to be fragile or incomplete begins to be recognized as whole, complete, and sufficient. The inward journey is subtle, but its effects are profound. It cultivates discernment, the ability to see what is real versus what is illusion. It cultivates freedom, the ability to act from clarity rather than reaction. It cultivates peace, a state that is not dependent on circumstances but arises naturally when the mind stops chasing what lies outside. Every moment spent looking inward strengthens the connection with this inner reality. Awareness deepens, insight arises, and the seeker begins to recognize that everything necessary has always been present, waiting to be realized rather than sought. This inward search does not require elaborate techniques or external validation. It does not demand that one follow prescribed rules or adopt beliefs. It is simply a shift of attention, a willingness to observe oneself deeply and honestly. The answers are not hidden behind walls or ceremonies, they are revealed in the clarity of observation and the stillness of presence. By stopping the endless search in the outer world and turning inward, one uncovers a profound and abiding truth. That happiness, peace, and freedom are not distant goals to be attained, but natural expressions of the mind when it meets itself fully. Ultimately, the journey inward is the most direct path to understanding. It is where the mind meets its own nature, where the heart discovers its own completeness, and where life is no longer a restless search but a luminous experience of being. When the search stops outside, it begins inside, and the truth that was always there is finally seen, recognized, and lived.